What's up again, everybody? Today we are going to take a look at some of the cards from the upcoming Batman Dice Masters set, due to release in May. I'll give my thoughts on the cards themselves and then give them all a star ranking from 1 to 5, with 1 signifying the cards that in my opinion won't see play whatsoever, whether that's because of the meta or because they're just bad cards, and 5 representing the cards that will be meta-defining. And obviously there should be more of the former than the latter, so I don't expect to be giving out 5s very often. I'll also give each card a star rating for draft format, with 1 star meaning that you should steer clear of this card in the draft, and 5 meaning that if you pass up this card in the draft portion, then you're making a huge mistake. Before we get started, I wanted to say that the screen grabs that we'll be using to look at these cards all came from the DC Comics Dice Masters Batman review from the Dice Tower, so if you want to go watch the video of him opening these packs or just showing off the cards that he got and the packs that were given to him, I'll link that in the description below. Alright, without further ado, let's get started with the card Batarang. It's a 2-cost bolt action die that says deal 3 damage to target villain character die. Has a new effect called Boomerang, and Boomerang says after using this die, roll it. If you roll an action phase, add it to your prep area, so it cycles itself. Batarang could be decent in draft. The fact that you can only use it on a villain, though, nukes its usability in constructed a good bit, though I do see villain teams becoming stronger with the advent of the modern format. I normally want to spend energy on characters that can influence the board over multiple turns over action dice. A card that deals 3 only to villains is a tough ask to purchase multiple of, but the 2-bolt price seems right for it, and the Boomerang ability helps it build up value over multiple turns. But overall, I'd give this a 1 star in constructed and a 2 star in draft. There's just too much going against it and not enough value coming from the die for it to make an 8-card team. Ace the Bat Hound is a 2-cost fist character that has the Bat affiliation. He's got an 0-2-1 side, an 0-2-2 side, and a 1-3-2 side, and an ability that says if your opponent has any active villain character dice, Ace the Bat Hound gets +2 attack. A 2-cost character with an ability that can consistently trigger in draft is really good. Having a 4-1 for 2 is not bad, and having a 5-2 for 2 is really good. The Bat affiliation is also useful for Bat family teams in constructed, and Ace has a low enough defense that it can be consistently KO'd to activate the trigger that runs the whole Bat family team's shenanigans. That being said, the ability is restrictive, and if it doesn't trigger, then you have this mediocre stat line for 2 and nothing more. So in draft, I'd give this a 3, but in constructed, this is probably more of a 2. Some people would put it onto a Bat family team and then probably cut it for something else. Next up, we have Bat Signal. It's another action die that's a 2-cost shield action. It's got the continuous keyword that says whenever you could use a global ability, you can send this die to the use pile to deal 2 damage to target attacking villain character die. It's also got 2 burst faces, and on both of them it says also you may flip target character card you control. The continuous ability here allows you to store up 2 damage and apply it to a villain when they attack. This feels too slow and restrictive for constructed unless this set is just so meta-defining that everyone is running multiple villains on teams or just villain teams in general. It's hard to evaluate how effective the flip one of your cards trigger is without seeing every flip effect. This could be worth running just for that, but as of right now I'd give this a 1 in constructed and a 2 in draft. 2 damage saved up over time is not great. Next we have Batgirl, the uncommon variant. This is a 3-cost fist character with the Bat affiliation. She's got Intimidate, which is a when fielded ability, and Batgirl can only use Intimidate on villain character dice. So with Intimidate being a when fielded effect, meaning that multiple dice can use Intimidate to remove an opponent's board, that's pretty cool, but unfortunately can only apply to villains. This is a great card for draft as the whole set is centered around villains versus Bat heroes. But the stat line is low for a 3-drop, more akin to a 2-drop, though in draft having that strong of a when-fielded ability makes this worth running, even though that 2-drop stat line is on a 3-drop card. I could see people putting this card onto a team that can apply the villain affiliation to your opponent's characters, but as of right now that would only be possible using Monument to Evil, a basic action card from War of Light, and because of that I don't have high hopes for this variant of the Batgirl card. I'd give this a 2 in constructed. I would give this a 4 in draft though, as you're going to be able to trigger that Intimidate ability pretty much every game you play because you're most likely going to be playing against someone who's got a villain on their team. And board clearing in draft is just super useful. Alright, on we move to the rare Connor Kent. This is a 3-cost shield character with the Superman affiliation. If this card didn't have an ability, it would already be good. It's an 0-2-1, which is low. It's a 1-3-3, but a 2-5-5 for a 3-drop is actually a really nice stat line on the top. And then you get to its ability that says Connor Kent gets +1 attack for each of your opponent's active villain character dice, which is just crazy in draft. So assuming your opponent's running 2 villains and has 2 villains on the field, then your 1-2 side becomes a 3-2. And even if your opponent has only 1, then your 5-5 side is a 6-5. That's insane for a 3-drop. If you see this card in draft, you should take it. This still has use in Constructed, if only for the stat line. The Superman affiliation helps its case in Constructed as well, even though there's not really a Superman affiliation team just yet, though this set might help that out. In Constructed, I'd give this a 3 just solely based on the villain trigger and the nice stat line for a 3-drop. I'd give this a 4 in draft. It gets close to pushing a 5, but I think this is a 4. Still a solid card, not crazy world-ending format breaker or anything like that. It's just a really nice card. Pick it up, pressure your opponent a ton. We also have Commissioner Gordon, the common version. It's a 4-drop fist character with the Bat affiliation, and it's got the ally keyword, which is really cool because this is a 4-drop ally. While Commissioner Gordon is active, your non-villain character dice cost 2 less to field, and he's got an 0-1-2, an 0-2-4, and a 1-4-4. This is a really cool card because it's got that ally affiliation, and it's got a good stat line by itself. I say good, but the stat line suffers on its level 1 side. Overall, though, it's got a good body on its 2 and 3 sides. Its secondary ability means that you're never having to pay to field any of your non-villain characters, freeing up that energy for anything else that you want to do, whether it be use globals or purchase things. This, along with the cards that we'll look at in a bit, give a serious buff to flying sidekick archetypes, and I predict that we'll see a huge resurgence of the flying sidekick teams, so I hope you held on to that Shannon Carter super rare. I'd give this a 4 in Constructed because of that, and I'd give this a 3 in draft. Maybe bump that up if there are some sidekick buffing things within the set itself that we haven't seen yet. Next we have Harley Quinn. This is the uncommon version. She's a 4-cost mask character. Obviously she's a villain, and this card says when Harley Quinn attacks, if at least one other villain character die is attacking, and you only control villain character dice, then she is unblockable. This is a win attacks ability that only triggers if only villains are attacking and you haven't used Scarecrow's ability to steal an opponent's non-villain character during your turn. If this were a card game with a deck, this card would be terrible, but because it's a deck building strategy game, this is actually pretty easily usable and achievable. The next question then becomes, how much do you value a 4-cost unblockable 4/4? There are a few villain pieces that apply buffs, and so this really could get pumped and be used as a reliable finisher for villain teams in draft and Constructed. Overall, I'd give this a 4 in Constructed and a 4 in draft, just because it's easy in Constructed to just slap this on to a villain team. And anytime in draft or in Constructed that you can guarantee unblockable damage without having to do much for it, that's good. We also have here Connor Kent. This is the uncommon version. It's a 3-cost shield character, just like the one before, only this one says Connor Kent cannot be blocked by villain character dice. I think this card is something you should watch out for in draft, especially if you're drafting a villain team. I think it finds its most usefulness in draft, but does not have as much use in Constructed unless the meta turns to villain teams all over the place. If that's the case, then this is pretty good because you just push through. It forces your opponent to bring something that's a non-villain character or some way to KO on your opponent's turn so they can't just attack with Connor Kent. Otherwise, I would think this would be pretty limited in Constructed and probably not see play. I'd give this a 2 in Constructed and a 3 in draft. Okay, up next we have the other 2 Harley Quinn variants. The one on the left is the 3-cost rare version. Its card text says, while Harley Quinn is active at the beginning of your turn, if you control at least 2 different villain character dice, your opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. The nice thing here about the wording is that it actually allows you to count Harley Quinn as one of those 2 unique villain characters, so this ability is pretty easily triggerable. And while it should trigger pretty consistently, this won't have too terribly much impact on the game, so you're looking at it as a 1-4-4 for 3 on the stat line side of things. And looking at Constructed, there's probably just too many other good options to go onto a villain team than this one. You could replace it with probably any of the other Harley Quinns and be better served, because the ability here is just pretty low. It's a lot of fun, kind of memey, but other than that, it's pretty non-existent on ability impact. Its biggest impact in draft is that it is a 3-cost villain character, and it does get some buffs that you could apply with other cards that you draft during that are villains. So for that reason, I'd give this a 1 in constructed and a 3 in draft. And finally, the last of the Harley Quinns, this is the common version. It's another 4-cost with the villain affiliation. This one says when Harley Quinn is active, whenever you field a non-Harley Quinn villain character die, draw a die and add it to your prep. If someone forced me to pick one of these 3 Harley Quinns and put them onto a villain time, I'd probably pick this one every time, just because building ramp into your team is so powerful. When you don't have to go out of your team into the basic actions to use ramp or to access ramp, and it's already built in that your opponent can't actually get to as well, it's really good. Add in the fact that this has villain synergy and is not a terrible stat line for a 4-drop, even though that 2/2 is pretty bad, and you seriously have a good card for constructed and draft. I'd probably give this like a 3 or a 4-star in constructed because of that built-in ramp ability, especially in this modern format. And it's a fairly bold claim, but I think I would go 5-star in draft for this card just because ramp is so important in draft. It's actually probably more important in draft than it is in constructed, simply because it's more scarce in draft than it is in constructed. And if you can get ramp in draft, you have an extreme advantage over your opponent. All right, the last 2 cards we're going to look at in this first part of this card prediction are both Owlman. This is the Owlman common. It's a 5-cost shield character. It has the Crime Syndicate affiliation. It's got a 1/3/3 side, 1/4/3 side, a 1/5/4 side, and the commons version says, when fielded villain character dice you control get +2/+2 until the end of the turn. This card is a dream to see early in a draft because you take this and then you just start building around it. It's such a good linchpin finisher for a villain team. You probably want like 2 of these in a draft and then slam those things down, purchase them and slam them down and rotate them. The big downside that I see to this card is that it is a when fielded effect that triggers this, so you really need to cycle this die pretty much every turn to get that super value, but if you can do that, this is insane. This is the card that makes any of those Harley Quinns previously mentioned to this point super scary because it buffs their stat line like insanely, especially that uncommon version that can go unblockable. If you combine this common Owlman with that uncommon Harley Quinn, say you have 2 uncommon Harley Quinns on the board and you attack with those 2 as well as having all villains, you know, you meet the requirements of those cards, you could potentially be sending 2 unblockable 6/6s at your opponent, which is just sick in draft. I think the 5 cost is a bit high for an ability in constructed, but I do think the 5 cost is achievable, and I think this does earn a spot on a constructed team. I think it'll still see play, and I think it'll see play in draft like crazy. So I would give this a 4 in constructed and a 4 in draft. I don't say 5 just because a 5 cost is hard to get multiples of, and this is a when fielded ability, meaning you need to cycle it, but this is a solid 4, almost a 5 in draft. You want to take it just about every time you can. And last up, we have the uncommon version of Owlman. He's another 5-cost shield character, same stat line, same affiliations. His card says when Owlman is KO'd, your opponent KOs the highest purchase cost non-villain character die that they control. The uncommon version is a nice auto KO and could trigger more often than the common version could, just because cycling is way easier, I think, on this card than it is on the other card. If you're playing against a good opponent and you're attacking with Owlman trying to get it to cycle, they're more likely to let that one through than everything else. I think the ability is powerful in the sense that it puts your opponent in a different kind of catch-22 than the common version, in that they have to either take 5 damage or lose 2 of their characters, 1 for KOs and 1 for the ability trigger. That being said, the defender's advantage in Dice Master lowers the value of this card. I don't see this seeing play in constructed, as it's just too awkward for purchase cost, and the ability doesn't have that oomph that the other one did. So I would give this one a 1 in constructed and probably a 2 in draft. So those are the first 12 cards that we'll take a look at today. What do you think of those cards? Sound off below. And do remember that these star rankings are based on likelihood of seeing play, which I think encompasses card quality and also the meta analysis of what we might see the meta turn into with this set being released and with modern format being a thing. I'm currently working on putting the second part out of this, so expect to see that sometime soon here in the next couple of days. And as always, guys, thank you for watching.